an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Haunting of Hill House, Season 1, Episode 9, Screaming Meemies. In this episode, we get to see Olivia's point of view and meet the Poppy that talked her into attempting to kill her own children and successfully killing someone else's. Poppy's the worst. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Candace for commissioning this episode. Candace is here in the chat. Hey, girl. So this episode was really sad. What got to me about this one, especially as a woman who has friends with kids, Candace being one of them, and Candace being in a particularly difficult position, it really felt to me like a slightly more extreme version of the kinds of headspaces I'm sure a lot of women get in, where they are incredibly overwhelmed. They are being gaslit from multiple directions. Their partner is like doing their best to be supportive if they have one, but maybe doesn't really get it. And they, see the way the world is. And the sort of the way this episode begins, I had a pretty good idea just from the way they set it up where we were going. As soon as we see Olivia laying on the couch and she has both Luke and Nell draped over her arms. First of all, she says they won't be caught dead like this in a little while. And I was like, okay, show, you know what? Pump the brakes. Stop it. No. What we're not going to do is make coy little jokes like that. But she says, I wish that I could just freeze them like this. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, okay, that's what this is. That's why it's the two youngest that this is happening to. She has 3 kids that already feel like they're a little bit too far away. And these last 2, she feels like she can do something about this. And I think that this begins as a natural feeling of a mother who loves her children and wants to hold on to these years. And the house, this is my assumption about how things function with this house. I was describing in the novel how it really felt like the house sort of sought out the person who had the most unstable foundation to their mental health. And it would work on their natural, already existing insecurities and fears. So in the book, Nell is somebody who is very insecure about her own, her life being not what she wanted it to be. She's still living with her parents. She's got a very overbearing mother and doesn't have a lot of freedom. And she doesn't really have any friends, and she feels very self-conscious about that fact. And the house works its way into her psyche, sort of convincing her that everyone around her is secretly laughing at her, mocking her. She gets weirdly sort of jealous about relationships. And I think this is the house working on Olivia. She already has this fear about losing her children, not being able to keep them safe, and the house just zeroes in on that and exploits that. It's not like this is what the house would do to anyone who wound up here. I think the house finds the particular fear of any given person who happens to be vulnerable to their influence, and then goes at them from that direction. Any good con man or manipulator would do. So, yeah, as soon as she said that, I was like, all right, okay, that's what we're doing. She's trying to freeze her children in time. And it makes a little bit of, when you look back, the way that things kept happening between both Nell and Luke, she was trying to get them to come home. Now the question remains, when they see her, is that her? Is it the version of her that the house is manifesting, trying to get them back because they're the unfinished meal? Is their mother even involved at all in those sorts of summonses? Or is she aware of them? Because I'm curious, you guys, I was asking this in the previous episode, and was it the episode before that? Well, the one where we find out that Hugh is seeing his wife. And I was asking whether or not people thought this was a genuine coping mechanism that was like in his imagination, or if it was an actual ghost. And it sort of was back and forth with the responses that I was getting. And I think if we interpret it as an actual coping mechanism and not that she's a literal ghost, I feel like that makes more sense. But I'm saying that with like with the full understanding that I don't know how the mechanics of a haunting work in this universe entirely. Because if I think that there's an actual ghost of their mother at Hill House, and in addition to that, Hill House can manifest a vision of their mother that is not her, but has the effect, then why can't Hugh also be seeing a separate ghost of her? How do I know she can't be multiple places at once? I have no idea how any of this works. However, I tend to think that because of what Hugh sees the night that they flee the house, I don't feel like the people who die at Hill House get to leave. It feels sort of like Bly Manor. If you die there, you're stuck there. And with Bly Manor, it's obviously a different scenario because there's this sort of force field that was created and they slowly disintegrate even as ghosts so that their faces are gone. And this is a different thing. It feels more like the house is holding on to these husks as trophies or something, weirdly. It's like the house itself feels possessive. So if that is true, then I'm going to say Hugh isn't actually seeing a ghost. He is just doing what he said to Luke, which is he's sort of manifesting a coping mechanism for himself. And honestly, if that's true, it doesn't really change the effect of what Hugh has been going through. It does change things a little bit to me that he talks to her right in front of his children, especially if he seems aware that she may not actually be there. So that's the only thing that sort of is the hang-up for me. I have a hard time thinking that Hugh has the self-awareness to be like, I'm just manifesting this as a mechanism. And he would chat with her right in front of Steve that way. It feels a little bit weird. But what do I know? Again, So, like I said, the episode begins with her on the couch, asleep. I have said it before, and I will say it again. This does not look like the kind of couch anybody accidentally falls asleep on. It just doesn't. And I have to assume that it's like this fucking sinister working that causes people to fall asleep there, because there is no reason otherwise for this to be comfortable. Like, folks aren't even, fitting onto this couch entirely, And later on, we see Hugh has fallen asleep on it, and I was just like, no. So, she's talking to Hugh about how she wants to keep these kids frozen. The camera sort of zooms in on her face. He asks if her arm is asleep, and she says no, and then she looks down, and Luke is gone from her arm. And she glances up, and there's this real sort of shock moment. She really seems disoriented. And when he turns to look at her, Hugh is carrying Luke. And it's a really nice, bit of foreshadowing and a metaphor, for her fear that for some reason he's the enemy. Hugh is seen as the one that is the danger to the children. He doesn't understand how to keep them safe. He won't believe what you tell him. He won't agree to do what needs doing. So you're going to have to get rid of him. And look, he's already you just let your guard down for a second and look, he's walking away with your kid. See? It's a very small moment, but it feels like the house just doing its very basic laying of the groundwork of getting her to be a little uneasy and feel like, wait, how did you get him away? I didn't even see you pick him up. And wait, and it's not like it's sinister exactly. It's just enough to get those gears working in that direction. And I thought this was really excellent. I feel for Olivia so much. They do an incredible job of showing the build up of her growing more and more scattered, as Mr. Dudley would say, and it being understandable why she doesn't understand what's happening to her, and also how it looks to everyone else. And you just feel so much sympathy because there's a real sense of that there was no way she was going to be able to make it out of this place. It's like she stepped foot in this house and that was it. And due to the nature of, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's not really, it's still to do with the show. But you know how Nellie is the bent neck lady that she has been seeing as a kid, and somehow the haunting from the bent neck lady is what caused her instability, which eventually brought her back to the house, which is what killed her and thus made her into the bent neck lady. It's this big circle. It's sort of what's true of Olivia as well. She has a vision when she goes into her reading room one day of Nellie on the slab in the morgue and Luke on the floor dead of an overdose. I still don't know what's going to happen to Luke. He's alive as far as I am concerned, and I will be so devastated if Luke dies. I really will. I just won't be able to handle it. That said, he was very much on that track. If he survives this, he just barely was able to sidestep dying that way. And all of this, Nellie's death included, is due to the death of their mother and her getting taken over by this house. And yet the house, in the form of Poppy, which we will talk about, has convinced her that these kids can't be safe anywhere but in this house. So in a lot of ways, what happens with Olivia is really similar to what happens with Nell, where she inadvertently creates the future that she's trying to avoid. It's a real Greek myth sort of tragedy situation where you see a portent of the future. Someone has a vision, and the very things that you do to keep that from happening are what cause it to happen. And there's something about that that's so depressing. It's just really like this. I don't think this is what the show is trying to say, but I can't help but feel this, that at the root of everything is our own inevitable behavior and the fact that we always do the thing that we were going to do, that no matter how much we try and change our patterns, they are so entrenched that even in trying to change them, we still do the same thing and wind up in the same place anyway. I don't think that's actually true. I think that there is a lot of danger of that, but I think you can break free. It just takes so much work. And most of us aren't willing to do that kind of work, at least not in every area of our lives. That's in part why I believe in multiple lives, because I'm just like, it's not fair. It's not fair that you just get one shot and that's it. And I think it's only fair that you get to like live multiple lives and try and like do better the next time and then the next time. So this whole thing about how she's just desperately trying to keep them from winding up in a place that we know is almost exactly where they do wind up due to what she winds up doing over the next couple of weeks, it's really heartbreaking. And if she had known how this was going to go, can you imagine what she would have done to Poppy? What could she have done? That's my real question. If she had been able to fight back at all, how would that have like manifested? What would that have even looked like? Because we see when Luke tries to fight back, the house defends itself for sure. So I'm not entirely certain there was anything past a certain point. Once Poppy like gets her claws into her, that Olivia could have resisted at all. But I don't know if that's true. So the reading room. Well, actually, first we have this conversation with Nell and Mrs. Dudley when they're cleaning up the glass from the storm blowing out the windows. And it's interesting because, like, I think I said when I watched the episode where the windows get blown out that when you cut back, the windows look like they are intact again. So I don't know, if it's supposed to be that like it was just a confused series of images that he was seeing. But the windows did indeed get blown out and there's so much glass and she comes walking in barefoot. And I was just like, right there, everybody should know something ain't right. Bitch, go put shoes on. What are you doing? And that is a common factor with everybody being barefoot. Poppy is barefoot. And she comes in and she tells Mrs. Dudley a story about how Clara is her first name. She tells Clara a story about how when her father died, she couldn't process it immediately. And she didn't really have much of a reaction until like days later, I think, or a week later. And she was sitting in his armchair and suddenly like it all came over her. And the numbness went away and was replaced with such pain. And as she was crying, there was a noise almost like rain, and it got louder and more violent. And then she realized that it was these little stones raining on the house. And she tells Clara, I know it sounds stupid, but as a kid, I was convinced that I cried so hard, I made it rain rocks. And I'm like, yeah, that does not sound stupid. That sounds like exactly what happened. I cried harder and it rained harder. Like, that's not a coincidence. That's most definitely what was going on. This is some poltergeist type shit. Because a lot of people believe that poltergeists are actually like energy that is too great to contain. Oftentimes coming from people who are like adolescents and are going through major upheavals in their lives. And it somehow creates actual physical force that moves objects around. And it's not a ghost. It's not any sort of like other being. It's almost like the steam being let out, and causing things to fly around. So that for me is just another indicator that she has always been somebody who has, if not in like actual abilities, there is something about her that is not average. She's more sensitive is the way that she puts it to Theo. I feel like she seems like a conduit somehow, So she tells the story, and Clara says something about how her daughter hates storms too. And I hadn't really stopped to think about the Dudleys and their kids' situation. I had assumed because of the way that her husband spoke that they did have another child. But it didn't occur to me that the kid would be like around the grounds, because I assumed they would keep the kid far away. And it turns out that's what Clara thinks she's doing. She's under the impression, I have laid down the law and told this little girl to stay away from the house. She is not allowed to step foot in here. As it turns out, Abigail is not fucking listening. Abigail is Clara's daughter. She turns out to be real, which I will tell you what, guys, blew me the fuck away. The idea that she was real never even fucking entered my mind. I swear to God. And there's this really great moment where Luke is asking Theo for some of her clothes, or maybe it's Shirley. I think it's Theo, though. No, it's Shirley, I think. But she's asking for some clothes and says Abigail's clothes are not as cool as yours. They look really old-fashioned. And of course, when you think she's a ghost, you're like, well, yeah. But then when you step back, well, Clara is like a kind of a fundamentalist, a homeschool mom. She probably makes Clara's clothing herself. And, she seems like one of those types of women. So yeah, her clothing would be old fashioned. She wouldn't be wearing like cool, like jeans and shit, the way that the other kids are. So I just really loved that there was a very reasonable explanation for her to be dressed how she is. And I also think Abigail hating storms, that there's like a suggestion there, very slight, but I'm still going with it, that she is a kind of sensitive that Olivia is, and that maybe she's being drawn to the house because of the fact that she has this sort of openness to it, and that is why she can't seem to stay away. I just feel there's no way that you have a little kid, no matter what kind of child they are, and you tell them, hey, this big, spooky, rad-looking fucking house is totally off limits. The one that I and her father work at that's like 10 minutes away through the woods. You're not allowed to go there. Any kid would absolutely fucking go there. Like, I was a fucking scaredy cat, and I would still have done it. I don't care, You just couldn't help it. But I really think that there's something else going on with Abigail. There's just an energy to the way that she is portrayed that makes me feel like she was susceptible as well. Let's see. Ariel says, it feels so obvious on a second watch through all the hints are right there, especially if that house has 5 kids 2 your age. Yeah, that's true too. If you're like alone and you hear kids playing, you're not going to be able to help it. Like, you want friends naturally. Ashley says, I caught that she had a daughter, but for some reason I kind of had it in my head it was the baby, and after she had, the baby that had died, as if she had control of her physical appearance and could appear to Luke as a kid like him, even though she was stillborn. I don't know. Oh, that's interesting. That's kind of a neat idea, Ashley, because evidently there is, the house is able to show things that it wants. So if that were the case, I could see the house being able to do that. So I can understand that. But yeah, so first of all, Clara, I just can't imagine what she must have gone through when she found out what happened to Abigail. Oh my God. Like, this poor woman. Her and her husband had already been through it, and to find out this happened again, and she would know, she'd have to know what happened. She'd know for sure after everything that they went through that the house did it. What do they do? Do they move away? Can they move away? Like, what are their options? Her husband was born there. And for some reason that makes me feel like you're in this house's orbit and you don't get to leave. You need the equivalent of rocket power to get out of here. I wouldn't be surprised if Clara killed herself. I really wouldn't. It just seems like you lost 2 kids that way, and in such a way that nobody would probably believe you if you tried to explain. So you just have to hold that your whole life. I think her husband would believe that that was what happened because he seems to know what that deal is with the house. He gets it. So at least she can share with him the knowledge and not feel gaslit. However, that doesn't bring her kid back. So I don't know. If I were them, I would have tried to burn the place down already. So let's see. I'm so all over the place with the way I'm talking about this situation. So we have her reading room was where I like started to go. She is like on the edge of a migraine. She goes and takes some medication, and her kids are arguing in front of her, and she has this moment of looking really, again, sort of overwhelmed when they ask her for her opinion, and she just says, "You kids have fun. If you need me, I'll be in my reading room." And Luke says, which room is her reading room? Which is just, again, such a great little bit, and it's occurring to me, everybody had a room in this house that seemed like it was there for them very specifically. And I'm realizing that's the red room for everyone. We have the game room for Steve. We have the toy room for Nell. The tree house for Luke. Also for Steve somehow. What does Shirley see? And I don't know if Hugh sees anything either. But Theo, I think it was the dance room. Because I was looking at it like, this is the perfect room for this when it was happening. She had the TV with a VCR in it, full mirrors on one side of the room, the railing going around like you would do for like bar. And I was like, wow, they have a full-on like dance studio in the house. That's awesome. Obviously, that was not actually there. It was for them, but it wasn't. And I even thought in the scene with Theo, when she's in the dancing room, she is looking at the door handle as it turns and wiggles. And I thought that door handle with the lion's head looked like the door handle from the red room. But I was like, but that would mean that she's in it and they don't have a key. That doesn't make sense. And now I'm realizing that she is inside it, and likely, like, we have that whole scene where I think Shirley and Nell are trying different keys, and Nell sees somebody walking around inside the room. For all we know, that was Theo in there, like, dancing, or that was Luke in there playing around. Like, all the shadows that we saw inside the red room, we assumed were ghosts or some sinister force, but it may easily have been somebody who had been lured inside with these visions and was being prevented from hearing on the outside what was going on, because then they would begin to put together, oh my god, I've been in a fucking like hallucination this whole time, and the room can't allow them to figure that out. So of course they keep that detail from them somehow. So Theo sees the like handle wiggling and can tell somebody's trying to get in, but doesn't like understand really the truth of what's happening there, which is somebody probably attempting another key. That's what I'm going with here. And it's just wild to me because evidently that's how this has functioned for a while. Eventually, when Poppy comes to talk to Olivia for the first time, she says, "I love what you've done with the room," which is obviously like, oh, yours is different from mine. Look at this manifestation. And she says, first mine was a dressing room, then a nursery. And it's like the room of requirement, but like evil, you know? And this is also fascinating to me because I think I said when I started this that Stephen King has said The Haunting of Hill House is one of the scariest books he's ever read. I think he says that for him, it's like #1 horror he's read. And that it is a lot of the inspiration for The Shining. The movie The Shining does not really follow the same formula. And I have not read the book The Shining, but evidently the book is a similar thing where it's meant to be the building itself is evil. It's not like it's haunted by an evil spirit. There is something wrong with the actual structure. And it is like this gaping hole of energy and good and life that just keeps drawing away from the world. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because it makes me sort of like interested in reading The Shining, but also I can't imagine anybody doing it better than Shirley Jackson did because that book was fucking good. And I'm just like, maybe I don't want to, I'll make too many comparisons, you know? Ariel says she called it her family room. Oh, I didn't remember that. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if Hugh ever saw anything. I'm trying to think if we have moments of him being in a particular place that seems a little bit too good to be true, but I can't think of anywhere. So, she goes to her reading room, and this is like the first time that we had seen her in there. I was immediately like, oh, okay, so this is her red room. Somewhere that she can go to be alone, away from the pressures of a bunch of kids, all of these renovations, the whole house, having to deal with all of that. She's enjoying a cup of tea in the sunlight. And you see also that shawl that she had like found in some mysterious spot is draped over the back of the chair. Honestly, this reading room is lovely. It makes total sense that this is what she would see. I feel like most parents, a fantasy like room for them would be getting to be by themselves. I mean, even when you don't have kids, I think that there are a lot of people who have one bedrooms with their partner and they would like to just get away from their partner sometimes and be in their own space. I can't imagine how much worse it is with kids. So yeah, I mean, you know, me and Owen, we have a 3-bedroom so that we each have our own offices that we can retreat to. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have my own space and if it was just me and him in a 1-bedroom. Just like, no, you need your time to yourself. So she leaves this argument with her kids and she's holding on to like a what looks like a prescription bottle that she has just taken some of. And she goes into the room, and I should mention that when she's walking in, the door looks brown. It's not red. And when she steps in, it's the mortuary. Table is empty. She turns back, and Nell is on it. And she steps inside, and there's Luke on the floor. And we have this moment that's so good, where Nell sits up, and she's trying to talk, and she grabs this knife off the table next to her. And there's a sense of like, is she going to try and hurt her mom? And then you realize that her jaw has been wired shut because that's what you do to a corpse. And she cuts the wires in order to cry out, "Mommy." And it's truly like such a creepy scene. And it also, you know, I had said that when she appears to Steve, it looks like she's trying to say something about mom, and maybe he was just seeing this exact same vision, you know? And when she's talking later about it to Hugh, he says something about how like, oh, that was a terrible dream. I guess you fell asleep while you were reading. And you see her cling to that explanation. It's not even like she's mad that he suggests that that is what happened. It's more like, if I was awake and just hallucinated that, that's so much worse. So yeah, let's go with I fell asleep while reading, because I would love if that was what happened. Please and thank you. So, and she's talking about how vivid her dreams are and how it feels like it's happening all the time. And then we have her waking up in the middle of the night, and she sees a little kid. Now, this little kid, is this a ghost kid or is this Abigail? Because I don't see Abigail being out here in the middle of the night like this. I'm going to pause it. I'm watching it right now, this moment. I don't think it's Abigail, because that kid had a little hat on, and like the coloring was all off. It happened so quick, guys, that even like going to click pause on it. That I think I saw this person in the wrong ratio. I think I thought they were shorter, because now that I'm looking, that looks like old lady Poppy. Because, you know, we see like Poppy, there's a flash of her standing behind Olivia at one point when she's in the twins' room, and the camera like cuts away and cuts back, and it's the old moldering corpse in the dress. I think that's who this is, actually, is the old moldering Polly, like peeking in. So she gets up. Olivia tries to wake up Hugh. Doesn't work. I am assuming it's because maybe this isn't actually happening the way it looks like it is. She goes to see like who is at the door, and there doesn't seem to be anybody there. And when she turns around, there's Poppy, and she's leaning over Hugh, and she turns to Olivia and just says, shh, and then goes to the reading room and talks about how all of this was for her, and says, you know, I understand how hard it can be with children. You want to keep them safe, but you can't keep them safe forever, can you? And this is just part of her sort of working her way in. Because when she starts this off, Olivia isn't certain that this is a dream. And Poppy assures her, oh, yes, 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 I'm a dream, you're a dream. We are dreams. And she tries to ask Olivia, like, do you want to talk about what's been going on? And Olivia's like, I'm not sure I do. Clearly still has her guard up. But as the conversation continues, and Poppy leans right into the subject that has been on Olivia's mind, which is the safety of her children, Olivia's guard drops completely. And she's asked whether there's anything worse than that, and she says, I had a dream a few nights ago that I lost my little girl. And Poppy says, I had that dream too. I dreamed she was choking on her own body for no reason, just trying for air like the room was underwater, and shaking like she was in the hot squat. And I was like, okay, what? I looked this up for those interested, and that is the electric chair. That was like the slang for the electric chair. I have never heard that in my life, but that's fucking horrifying. I dreamed I held her little hand and sat at her side. And it took weeks. It took weeks for her to quit gulping that watery air, gaping at me like a fish on the beach. But finally she did. She breathed ragged and hard, and she went stiff, and one of her eyes turned red as blood, and she'd shake so bad the bed would shake. And when she'd shake, it went fast. She dangled. She died. So Poppy killed her kid, right? That sounds like Poppy hanged her own daughter, is what it sounds like to me. She dangled. She died. I am assuming that is what that all is, especially because like one of her eyes turning red. I feel like that's probably a symptom of like blood vessels popping. And then she talks about her boy. I once dreamed his little legs stopped working. They just stopped one day, and he couldn't walk. And he couldn't stand, and he couldn't speak. And then he couldn't do anything but cry. Cry and bang on the walls. Bang on the walls for help, and bang on the walls for mama. Just bang, 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 bang. And he couldn't even see. In the end, he couldn't see me there with him. And then he stopped crying. He stopped it all. Stopped banging once he died. I held him so long he went cold in my arms. And she's saying all of this and then suddenly comes back to herself and says, but that was just a dream. Now, I'm interpreting this, and I don't know if we ever get firm answers, but I am interpreting this as something did happen to her son to cause him to be disabled, and Poppy could not handle it. And she killed him because, in her mind, it was either A, too painful to see her kid in this condition. B, she was so overwhelmed having to care for this child who was not her little boy anymore. C, all of the above. I don't know, maybe the house started to like fuck his body up, because God knows what the house is capable of. But I think that she probably killed him also. And I don't know how she would have done that, because she doesn't mention any like method there. But there's just something to both of these like scenes, or both of these scenarios, the way that she describes them. There's too much distance between her and what happened, the way that she describes it. And then saying, but that was just a dream. I really think she was the one who killed both of those kids. I don't see a way around that. It just feels to me like that had to be how it ended there. I don't know. Let's see. Ariel says, I thought it was that she had some kind of disease where her lungs filled with water. Okay, so you're not thinking that she killed her daughter. Ashley says, Mike Flanagan did a Reddit AMA where he answers some of these questions. Do you want to know those kinds of external things? Ashley, I do. As long as it doesn't matter, if it's not like relevant to the, like, for example, I have one more episode to go. If that won't have any impact on the next episode, then yeah, let me know. If it will, wait till the last episode and then tell me. Ariel says, oh wow, seeing what's happening with Olivia, that must be it, that Poppy was also convinced to kill them either by the house or her own psychosis. That was what I thought. God, I sounded like I was from Long Island. The thing about Poppy that I find a little bit confusing is I can't decide if we're alleging that Poppy is like the source of the malice of this house. I don't feel like that's the case, because it does seem like the house is being suggested to be the one. Poppy is portrayed like there's the old lady that Olivia sees, because Olivia eventually, when she is going after her kids later on, she gets stopped by a sort of like, there's a moment of her seeming to come to her senses when she's at the door rattling the doorknob, and she looks up and the old woman ghost is passing by, and she tells Olivia she's a liar, that one. And I couldn't tell because Poppy occasionally turns into an old lady. So this old lady is Hazel, right? This is the lady that Clara was working with, I think. She is so scary looking, but she's honestly delightful. Like, this is one of those kinds of ghosts where I'm like, don't get me wrong, I don't want ghosts around, but if I were going to have like Hazel hanging out, she might be all right. She's so yeah, she says she lies, that one. Poppy, she's a liar. And she settles back on her cushion, and Olivia says, can you help me? And Hazel says, what can I do for you, dear? And she's just honestly like, she seems like, I'd help if I could. She seems like to know that probably she can't, but she's willing. It's just, she's in the clutches of this house too, Ashley says it's not going to be addressed. She murdered her daughter, Jacqueline, in the cement foundation of the house, which is probably part of why the house is like this. Ooh. Oh. In the cement foundation. How? I'm just trying to picture it. When she says she dangled and she died, maybe she hung her and then put her in the foundation, like, or maybe that dangle and like, maybe that's not, he wouldn't put that in the dialogue if there wasn't, that didn't have anything to do with how she died. Oh, Ashley, that's so interesting though, the idea of the, like, this being part of the literal foundation of what the house is built on. That makes sense. So eventually we have the scene where Poppy brings Olivia to the twins' room, and she's talking about how these two are going to be having bad dreams, and eventually they may have one of the worst. Would you be willing to wake them up? And she tells Olivia, here's how you keep them safe. It's a secret. And she whispers into Olivia's ear. And we don't hear what she says. I don't anticipate we'll ever hear exactly what she says. But we do cut from her saying this to Olivia on Hugh's chest, holding that screwdriver to his throat. So I have to assume that part of the secret of how to keep them safe is to kill Hugh. Part of it. Probably killing all of them is the thing, you know? But in the end, it does seem like she's most fixated on killing Nell and Luke. I don't know if all of her kids would have been included had she been given time. I have to assume that they all were on the menu and that the house was just willing to take what it could get. And it knew that those were going to be the two she was most vulnerable about. So let's see. Ariel says, yes, she is the sister of William Hill. Also reminder, William Hill is the one that bricked himself in the house and haunts Luke. Bricked himself into the house. That was something that I didn't actually talk much about when I got to the episode where they find the body, because I think I ran out of time. But I was like, why would he brick himself in? And all I can think is maybe he didn't know that's what he was doing. You know, I could see the house giving him a kind of vision to cause him to put a wall up and not realize until he sort of comes out of it that that's what he'd done. And then beginning to panic and trying to scratch and claw his way out. But it's too late and that shit is done. Because I just don't... everybody so far, it has seemed as if they haven't been aware of what they were doing when they killed themselves. It seems like not completely under their control. That said, the final scene with Olivia, when she throws herself off the balcony, they really are at pains to show us that Poppy does not actually push her off. Poppy's hand is right there. She is prepared to push Olivia should Olivia resist this influence, but Olivia doesn't. In the end, she does do it of her own free will. It's just that everything leading up to that point had been influenced, so it's not actually her own free will, you know? It's an interesting thing to really like hammer home that, yeah, she wasn't actively pushed. She did throw herself off, but you saw everything else that happened. Can you actually say that she threw herself off? Like, physically, that may be how it happened, but we all know that's not actually how it happened, you know? Ashley says, I would guess that he was likely in a trance-like state, like Olivia nearly killing Hugh. Yeah, and, you know, doing it to yourself. I mean, we saw that Olivia was ready to drink that damn tea with her children, too. She was fine with dying. Whatever, you know, as long as it fit in with the story of keeping her kids safe, it was just going to be part of whatever she had to do. So then we have that moment of her going back and talking to the twins again, and Nell asking, like, are we safe with you, Mommy? And her saying all of the things that were in the vision, like, what if this happens, and you sent us out there in the night, in the dark, and she gets sort of jumped out of it by Steve, and obviously seems very shaken by it. And the next scene is her and Clara talking in the sunroom with all of the little, the statues around. I have not gotten a great look at all these statues, but I feel like they have to have some meaning. I did post in the patron group a couple hours ago that somebody in the Two Storms episode noticed that one of the statues turns its head from the moment that Olivia steps into one of the rooms and steps out again when she's looking for Nell. The statue turns its head and looks at her. And it's very easy to miss, like I missed it, you know. But these statues in this sunroom, I have kept feeling like there has to be some significance to them, you know. And I was looking at them, and the one that's like front and center, that's the biggest, is, I can't remember her name. I think it's meant to be the woman who gets raped by Zeus when he's a swan. Leda? Is that her name? But she's got like a jug of water that's pouring out, and this swan sort of like hovering over her in a way that feels vaguely threatening. A weird myth to decide to make a sculpture of. I'll just say that. Also, interesting that it's like a being who is subject to the whims of a superior, like a god-like sort of force, and is violated and forced to do things that, like bear children. I was just like, is that anything, or like what does this mean? Because I have to think there's meaning behind choosing that particular statue to be the sort of centerpiece of this room. And she's talking to Clara about her feelings of protectiveness over her kid. And she asks Clara if she homeschools and says that she didn't used to understand why people would do that, but now she does. And there's a feeling that she has all the time of just like worrying about sending them out into this mean world. And Clara is like weirdly playing into the house's warnings. Like, she is telling Olivia to get out, and she emphasizes how the house is dangerous and not to be trusted, and that it's like a greedy thing that will eat people and feed off of them. And she literally says that. But you really get the sense that Olivia doesn't hear that part. Olivia hears, yeah, your kids probably are in danger. The world is a fucking nightmare. So even if your husband resists what you're trying to do, definitely do it anyway, because you fucking know, because you're their mother, and screw that guy. You're the person who knows what's best for them in the end. And it's really unfortunate, because I've definitely seen these kinds of conversations where somebody is like, they're on the right track, and I get where they're going with what, you understand what they are trying to say, but you can see that the person they're speaking to is taking the wrong message away from it. So it's just such a frustrating scene, because Clara is trying to tell Olivia, bail. This place is bad for you. But she makes Olivia so afraid for her children that of course she's not going to leave them here. Telling her to leave earlier and leave her children here, that's not how a woman who's feeling this kind of fear is behaving. Of course she wouldn't do that. So it's just really awful, because Clara did her best to try and like give her good advice, but she front loaded it with the part that the house is preying on, with that exact fear. And so that completely overwhelms the rest of her advice. Let's see. Ashley says, she's got the link to the AMA. I was wrong. It wasn't an AMA. It was just a Reddit post, and it wasn't Mike Flanagan. It was one of the other writers. It was more of a short story. Oh, and it's reddit.com/r/no sleep and something Poppy Hill. Okay, cool. Thank you, Ashley. So guys, yeah, search No Sleep Poppy Hill Reddit, and you might be able to find this. I'm not going to read to you the whole link. 9L ZS9L. Anyway, so this scene, like I said, it just comes so close to helping Olivia, and it doesn't in the end. We wind up seeing who she spots in the mirror behind her when she punches the vanity that Steve made her. And I should mention too that Steve decorated the vanity with stars. And I feel like that has to be part of the like theme with your cup of stars. It's like the same blue with, but yeah, she sees Nell and Luke behind her and punches the glass because it's the corpses that she saw in that vision. And we have the conversation between her and Hugh, where she tries to explain, he tries to say first that she's just stressed, and she has to talk him down from that and be like, no, I was before, like I had been creative and I had been excited and proud. I wasn't stressed though. I was just feeling a lot of things. And now it's like all of those things have gone away. All of those colors. And now there's just one left. And she's scared. And he says, okay, you know what? Maybe next week is a little bit late for you to be heading out. And she says, okay, I'll go tomorrow. And we start the next scene with her saying goodbye to her kids. And I'm like, so she did leave. Well, then what happened? I couldn't tell. At first I was like, okay, was she driving herself? If that's the case, then maybe she just decided to like park somewhere and turn around. But no, there's a taxi waiting for her. So I'm imagining like, well, did she do something to the taxi driver and then get out of the car and like not completely leave the premises? I couldn't, I was just watching this whole thing like, what is it that she's doing? Oh my God, you guys. I'm watching the scene where she's saying goodbye to her kids. And I just like stopped for a second when she's turning away with her suitcase rolling behind her. And there is a dude who looks like Jason standing in the doorway to the like room with the statues in it, watching her leave. And, there's been a lot of hidden ghosts in this show, but most of them have been so hidden that even when they're pointed out to you, you're like, I guess, yeah, okay, I see something. But that guy is really just standing right there. And there's something so much worse about how close to them he is and how fully manifested he is. This is just, I hate it. And this is when Luke asks her if Abigail can sleep over. And of course, we're still under the impression that Abigail isn't real. And she says, that's fine, sweetie, because I think she's also under that impression. She goes out to the taxi. And then we see her calling. And she's in the same hotel room that her husband brought the kids to when everything goes wrong later. And also the same room that Nellie was in when she came back to town. Is this fucking hotel real? Like, I'm genuinely in a place where I'm like, I don't know what's real and what's not anymore. I'm assuming the hotel is real. But I don't know that at all, actually. And, and we don't know what she said to the cabbie, or when she leaves the house, you really feel like she means it. But when she's sitting in the hotel room and she calls Hugh, she's got a whole other vibe. And so it feels like something changed on her way out. Unless she was just acting and she intended to go to the hotel the whole time. But I don't think so. I think she really did intend to leave. Ashley says, I'm assuming all of their hotel rooms must be identical. Or they're just winding up in the exact same room every time. Like, what if the hotel is real, but the room they're winding up in isn't exactly real? Or something. Like, I don't know. As this is all happening, we see Hugh back inside Hill House, and he pulls aside one of the tarps, and he sees the walls absolutely covered with black mold again, which he had apparently thought he had beat. And he just says it's not possible and backs away from this wall and like sort of collapses on the ground the way that you do when you realize that you've just sunk your money into something and you're about to go bankrupt. It's a really good analogy, this black mold. Thinking you did something, you prevented it, comparing that with her finally leaving Hill House. It's like you think, yeah, we managed to head off that problem. No, sir. It is still there. So, she comes back in the middle of the night. And luckily, she runs into Shirley. And I really love the whole way this is done, because when Hugh goes into the kitchen, he sees the rat poison, but it's because he flicks the light on. Shirley comes into the kitchen, and Olivia has got the light out. So all that Shirley notices is that her mom is acting really fucking weird, but she doesn't see the poison, or else she would have had a very different reaction to this whole thing. God knows what would have happened if she pointed it out. Like, she'd probably be dead. So she goes and tells her dad, and Olivia has gone to invite Nell and Luke to an impromptu midnight tea party. And this is where we see that Abigail is indeed real. Shocking. Like one of the biggest twists of the show, sincerely. And she brings them all to the Red Room, which all the Red Room has manifested. They haven't made it look like a beautiful little, like, tea room. They've made it so that there's a table and chairs, and otherwise the room looks like a goddamn nightmare. It's full of black mold. It's hideous. And unfortunately, poor Abigail drinks the tea. And it's just awful, guys, because it's bad enough to hurt your own children. But knowing that you took a child from someone else, when, like, she comes back to herself for a bit and sees the body of this little girl laying there, I cannot imagine. No wonder she decides to throw herself off the balcony. Even were she in her right mind at that point, I would understand feeling that way, you know? And when poor Abigail drinks the tea, that was when I was like, oh my God, she's dead. So she was a ghost too. It was both, you know, like, and luckily Hugh manages to bust in there and break all of the teacups and everything before any of his kids drink anything. Shoves Olivia against the wall, and she gets knocked out for a bit, just long enough for him to get his other kids out of the house. And then we see the whole scene where she has her hand on the door handle of Steve's room. And it's just so well done, with her almost having a moment where she realizes that this isn't right. It's like she just barely comes back to herself. And she is in the middle of the conversation with Hazel asking for help when she hears the door slam open and sees Hugh running down the hall with Steve in his arms. And it's just her whole nightmare. And she follows them, and she hurt her ankle, as it turns out. So that's why she's running in that bizarre way that's so creepy when you see it from Steve's point of view. And she watches them get into the car, and fucking Poppy is next to her telling her that this is Hugh killing all of them. And she tells Poppy to, like, fuck off. But by the time she does that and comes back to herself, she's already killed Abigail. So it's almost worse that she's come back to herself at that point, because the damage, like, she couldn't have gone on being blissfully unaware of what she had done. She had to be brought back just enough so that she gets to see the horrible thing that she did. And I should mention, too, that when Hugh grabs Steve and runs up out of there, he comes face to face with the ghosts for the first time. I think this is the first time that we've ever seen Steve see all of them. Hugh. I don't know if he has ever seen any of the ghosts so far, but you see him staring into, like, the main area of the house, and Poppy, old lady Poppy, is, like, in front. There's a variety of people standing here. There's somebody with, like, long, pale blonde hair. There's a guy who's got goggles on. He looks like everything is in such darkness that it's really hard to tell. But yeah, there's a crew standing there watching him. And then he backs away and turns around, and on the other end of the hallway is some guy coming up the stairs. Oh, I think the guy coming up the stairs is the clock repair guy. But anyway, yeah, it's a real moment, because this is the first time, I think, that he was actually specifically seen anything. And yeah, so Olivia watches them go. She goes back into the room and she sees Abigail on the floor, and then she sees Ghost Abigail standing there. And a woman comes up and takes Abigail's hand and walks away. And it was weird because she was like, she looked enough like a young Clara that I was like, has Clara been a ghost this whole time? But I don't think that's Clara. Like, I think Clara's actually alive. I don't know who this woman is. I don't know if you guys know. But she has a kind face and seems to be not evil. She doesn't have that, like, kind of putrescent look that the other ghosts that seem evil have had. But who knows? And then we have Olivia trying to follow for a moment, and she loses sight of them and then gets drawn to the balcony. And like I said, she goes up to the edge and she's talking about how she just wants to wake up. And Poppy is right behind her. And you almost have this moment of like, maybe she's not going to want to jump in the end. Maybe Poppy is going to push her, but she doesn't. She leans out and Poppy's hand is right behind her. Like if she had changed her mind, Poppy would have pushed her, but she didn't have to. And then after she is dead, we have like a flashback to their arrival at the house and how high energy and excited everybody is. And it's really awful because everybody's going inside and Olivia's just feeling kind of tired, and she tells Hugh and the kids to go on without her. And he says, "How could we?" And that is the end of the episode. And I was just like, well, that's just rude. So yeah, let's see. Just want to make sure I'm not missing any comments. Ashley says, I had a freaky moment recently when I was looking at long-term rental apartments. They'd taken the exact same photo of the same room 5 times until I realized in one the fireplace was on the opposite wall, or in one there was no mirror. That freaked me out. Ariel says he hasn't knowingly. What a way to first encounter ghosts, right? Because it looks like they're all fucking grouped up like they're about to do a Sharks and Jets impersonation. I always thought it was Dudley's mom. Mrs. Dudley's mom. Mr. Dudley's mom? Oh! Because she was the one who took care of Hazel, and then his mom or his wife took over. Oh, okay. Right, Nancy. Yeah, okay. Mr. Dudley talks about his mom dying in the house, so I think it's her grandmother, Abigail's grandmother. Got you. Oh, that's kind of sweet, even though it's horrible. Oh, poor grandma's like, yeah, we knew. Come and see your baby sister over here. All right, guys, I'm over time as usual. I got to wrap, but thank you all again so much. I will just, of course, be doing a live watch for the next episode, but I don't know when, so keep your eyes peeled. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.